Hello, welcome to Miss Simpson's art class. I'm glad you're here. Today we're learning some realistic tips and tricks for drawing an eye. I'm just using white copy paper, and I also have a compass available that I'm going to use for drawing some straight lines and getting those circles right. You can also draw your lines and circles freehand as well. I'm going to be using a Ticandera pencil. Before we start to get into how to draw a realistic eye, let's talk about some of the basic types of drawing an eye. Okay, so before we get into drawing a realistic eye, let's talk about a more basic or abstract version. Even if you haven't spent a lot of time reviewing what does an eye look like, there are these basic parts of the eye that we all know. We have the top of the eyelid, the pupil, the iris, where the eyelashes are, and this is a more abstract version of the eye because when you look at it, it reads as an eye. However, it doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look like a photograph or a real life person that you would see. So that's our basic or abstract eye. I'm going to show you why some of the ways we draw our basic eye do not match up with how the eye looks in real life. We're going to start by drawing that horizontal line across our paper. That horizontal line is going to determine the length of your eye. So you want your line to be long enough that you'll be able to see the details that you're drawing in the eye. After you start with the horizontal line, we need to figure out, are we drawing the left eye or the right eye? Where is the nose? Which side of the face am I looking at? For this drawing, I will be drawing the left eye. So what I just drew is actually the eye socket, where the eye goes back into the eye socket. It's not the eyelid, it's something different. So as we're drawing the left eye, right here is the inner corner of the eye. And that inner corner of the eye is gonna go steep, steep, steep uphill. Make sure you observe either your eye in a mirror or the eye of your subject, because this could be very different depending on the person. So these are just basic guidelines. The second line is going to slope downhill just a little bit because the third angle is going to go back to the corner of your eye. So these shapes are creating the guideline for our the shape of our eye, which is going to be mostly almond shaped. However, the eye can vary very, very differently depending on who you're looking at. So this is a general shape, the hill, if you will, for our eye socket, where the shape of our eye will go. On the top, there are 3 different angles: a straight uphill, slightly sloping downward, and then the downhill. But on the bottom, there's really only 2 angles. So if you bring that line too far down, you're going to get closer to notating where the bags of the eye are, but we want to bring that angle up a little bit. We don't want it to be too far down. We are giving ourselves the guideline to where the eye comes out of the eye socket. We're not trying to label the bags of the eye with this one. So you want to bring your angle up a little bit. So I'm deciding where my guidelines are. You guys should have 1, 2, 3 angles for the top and 1, 2 angles for the bottom, but of course these can be very different depending on what your eye looks like. So there's my nose there by the inner corner by angle number 1, and I'm using these guidelines to draw the shape of the eye. Notice I've been drawing lightly. As I always say, draw it light until you get it right. We are going to be using these guidelines to figure out the shape of the eye. Something to remember when you're putting the corner of your eye in is that the tear duct is going to go below that horizontal line. When you add the tear duct in, it's going to go below the horizontal line. Make sure that you're consistently looking at your subject, and some people you cannot actually visibly see where their tear duct is. It's just the eyelid coming down to that point, but in other people you can visibly see their tear duct. So pay attention to your subject. The example I'm going to be drawing will show you what it looks like with the tear duct. So we've got that general almond shape for our eye. Okay, now we have added the shape of the eye socket and the shape of the eye. The next thing we're gonna do is add a vertical line. That's where we're gonna put the pupil later. And we're gonna add that vertical line right in the middle of the eye. So you can use your compass to measure, or you can decide freehand where do you think is about the middle of the eye. Make a little mark and then align your straight edge up with that to create a vertical line. That's where we're gonna place the pupil and the iris and everything inside the eye. Before we do that though, let's create the water line. That's where the lower lashes come out of. That's where, not your lower lid, but there's a small definition in between your eye and your lower lid. So we're gonna draw a parallel line running straight along with the bottom lid of our eye, but just not touching it. That's where we're gonna draw our eyelashes out later. Then I added a little curve to represent the tear duct. So this is the water line and the tear duct. That's gonna help our eye look 3D, adding those elements. So let's put our pupil in right there where we drew our vertical line, and the bottom of the pupil is going to go at the horizontal line, rest right there. I'm adding a bigger circle behind it. That's the iris. Notice how the iris is not 100% visible. I can't see the whole thing. Some of it is actually behind the eyelid. Take a look at your eye in the mirror and see how you can't always see your full iris. Usually parts of the top and parts of the bottom may be a little bit cut off. So now I can kind of curve out those lines representing my eye socket. We're gonna shade all this in later. This is just showing us that our eye is coming out of something because our eye goes back in space according to the planes of our face. So now I can use this guideline as where to draw my lid. I'm gonna take my eyelid just a little bit lower than what I have up there. I'm cutting off even more of the top of the iris. And now I can shade in that eye socket. That's gonna give my eye some depth. And I'm gonna go back and erase the eyelid because the eyelid is coming forward, whereas the eye socket is going back in space. I can also do some shading underneath, showing where my eye is coming out of that eye socket. Now I'm gonna even out where that circle was. I've noticed it's not symmetrical. I'm trying to make the pupil symmetrical in a circle. And inside the pupil, there's going to be these little elements of reflected light or highlights. I'm going to block those out first before I color in the pupil because I want those to remain really light. So the pupil has those reflected highlights. Let's start by boxing out shapes to leave them light. I tend to think of it like a donut cut into pieces, how you'll have sections that are curved on the outside and inside. So think of it how you want those little pieces in there to be reflected highlights. Then I can take my pencil and color in the rest of my pupil really dark. The pupil is the darkest part of the eye. To draw my lines representing the iris, I can erase that horizontal line in there, but the vertical line is going to be a good guideline. So now I can go through with my pencil and shade in the top. Because my eyelid is actually casting a shadow over my iris, the top part of my eye is going to be darker than the bottom part of my eye. And when I shaded, I went a little overboard, so I'm going back in with my eraser to make sure those reflected highlights are still very bright and light. So after I've shaded in my iris, I can add these little lines for detail. The shape that I'm making these lines is almost like I'm going outward, like a sun, like rays of the sun, and they have a little curve close to the center. So I'm going to continue making those lines with my pencil. Also, the same way we shaded, we want to add those lines in. We'll have more lines up at the top of the iris and less lines at the bottom of the iris. This is going to create that 3D effect. So you see me using both my addition tools and subtraction tools here. My addition tool meaning when I add the lines with the tip of my pencil, and my subtraction tool being when I go back and use my eraser to erase some of the lines that I don't want, okay? Your eraser is just as much of a tool as your pencil. So I darken the lines around the iris. This depends on the color of your eye, whether the lines around the iris are darker or not. So you get to decide how you would like your eye to come across. So now we've completed our pupil and our iris. Let's talk about the eyelashes. Think about the Nike Just Do It symbol, a little check with a curve, not sponsored, thank you Nike. We can go in and add those little flicks of a curve, and they're going to be curving the opposite direction on both sides of the eye. So here on the outer corner, we have them curving out and upwards. And then when we get closer to our second plane number 2, they're going to be going more like straight up. And of course they vary in length. You want to have a variety. Some are going to be longer, some are going to be shorter. They're going to be the longest over there on plane 3. And then they're going to gradually get shorter towards the center of the eye on plane 2. And we're going to start shifting directions, curving the other direction when we get closer to plane 1. So adding that curve or U shape on the bottom really gives that illusion that the eyelashes are coming out or growing out of the eyelid, not just resting upon the eyelid. In our basic and abstract version, we have the eyelashes as straight lines, but drawing realistically, the eyelashes would be curves and they would be in groups. Same thing on the bottom. Notice how they're curving one way. When you get to the center of the eye, they're pretty straight, and then they curve the other direction on the outer eye. You want to add your eyelashes in groups because they grow in groups. Again, our eyelid is casting a shadow on the eye, so I'm adding some shading right there. And I'm going to go back and erase some of my guidelines and blend some of my shading in. So now we have a pretty realistic eye. The last thing we're going to talk about is where to put the eyebrow. The eyebrow has an arch in it that usually changes direction after the end of the iris. So find that point on your eye, mark the end of the iris. The beginning of the eyebrow usually starts at the corner of the eye, sometimes a little bit in front of the corner of the eye. So I'm just going to erase plane 1, 2, and 3 because we don't need those for the eyebrow. And the eyebrow usually ends after the outer corner of the eye. So now let's talk about the direction. When you're drawing the eyebrow, the first direction the hair grows is straight up. When you get over here to the outer corner and to the arch, the direction does change. So I'm just kind of placing where I want my eyebrow to go. A lot of people give eyebrows an unrealistic arch, or like they make them too arched, or they make the eyebrow way too high above the eye. Your eyebrow's realistically pretty close to your eye. So the first direction of the hair goes straight up. The next direction is a little tilted away from the center of the face. And then the last direction is almost completely horizontal at the end, okay? And you can decide, do you want your eyebrows to have a lot of different layers of hairs, or would you rather them to be more fine? This really depends on the person. Also, the shape of the arch depends on the person. So looking at your subject will tell you exactly how high or what angle to put the arch at. A lot of this is drawing from observation. So I want to add a lot of layers for these hairs to go in these different directions. I'm going to bring my eyebrow a little bit lower, closer to the corner of my eye. And I'm going to leave it like that. So that's some different parts of the eyes. We started with the horizontal line, and then we decided where the shape of the eye socket would go. We added that vertical line for the waterline and tear duct. And we added our eyelashes in groups, did a little shading. And we added the eyebrow. So there's our example of a realistic eye.